Charleston, 1798. The screams came first, not from the enslaved, not this time, but from the men who thought themselves masters, overseers, whips still dangling from their fists. By dawn, 4 bodies lay broken in the dirt, their backs carved open not by lash, but by the very whips they had wielded. And at the center of it stood a man, tall, scarred, his face shadowed in the firelight, his hands still trembling, knuckles slick with blood and leather. To some, he would be remembered as a monster. To others, a martyr. But in that moment, as the overseer's blood sank into the soil, he was only one thing: a man with nothing left to lose. His name, spoken in fear, whispered in secret, was Thomas the Butcher. But Thomas had not always been a butcher. Before the rebellion, before the blood, before Charleston whispered his name like a curse, he had been flesh and bone, a man born into chains. The year was 1769. Charleston, South Carolina, the beating heart of America's slave economy. Rice, indigo, cotton. Wealth dripped like honey from plantation to port. But behind that wealth was rot. Every brick, every polished floorboard, every silver goblet, paid for by men like Thomas. Men who bled in the fields, who bent their backs until the sun itself grew tired of watching. Thomas had been born into that world. A world where children did not inherit fathers' names, but their chains. His earliest memory? The crack of a whip, not on his back, but on his mother's. He was 6 years old, small, wide-eyed, watching from the dirt. His mother had stumbled in the fields, a sack of rice heavier than her body could bear. The overseer's whip sang, once, twice, 3 times, until her cries fell silent. Thomas never forgot the sound. Leather splitting flesh. The overseer's laugh, and the silence that followed. That silence burrowed into him. It hardened him. By 15, Thomas was taller than most men. Broad shoulders, hands thick with calluses, chest carved by labor. But strength was a curse. Strong men drew the overseer's eye. Strong men were given the heaviest loads, the cruelest punishments. Strong men became examples, and Thomas was made into one. He was whipped for another man's mistake, shackled for another man's escape, dragged into the center of the yard, stripped to the waist, tied to a post, and the whip fell. Again, again, again. Every lash cut deeper than the last. By the 30th stroke, the skin of his back had peeled like bark from a tree. By the 50th, the overseer's arm trembled with exhaustion. By the 60th, Thomas had stopped making a sound. He did not beg. He did not break. He only stared. And in that silence, something shifted. The overseer, sweating, panting, whip dangling in his hand, looked into Thomas's eyes and saw not defeat, but fire. It was then the whispers began. Whispers among the enslaved, of a man who could not be broken. By the late 1790s, Charleston was a city balanced on a blade. The world beyond was changing. Revolution in France. Uprisings in Haiti, where enslaved men had risen and slaughtered their masters, declaring themselves free. Stories of Toussaint Louverture reached Charleston's docks like sparks carried on the wind. And sparks, in dry fields, lead to fire. The planters knew it. The enslaved knew it. The city was a powder keg. Charleston's white elite patrolled their streets with pistols on their belts. Slave patrols doubled in size. Any gathering of 3 enslaved men or more was deemed a conspiracy. And yet, in the quarters, in the shadows, the whispers grew louder. Whispers of freedom, whispers of rebellion, whispers of men like Thomas. Thomas did not seek rebellion, not at first. For years, he labored. He bent his back to the rice fields, carried timber on blistered shoulders, endured the overseer's cruelty. But cruelty has a way of piling up, a way of pressing down until even the strongest spine begins to splinter. It was a night in the summer of 1798, the air thick, mosquitoes whining in the dark, the overseers drunk, their laughter spilling from the great house. Thomas had been ordered to stand watch, whip at his hip, not his own, but theirs, placed there as mockery. He was to guard the fields from thieves, though the only thieves he knew were the ones who claimed to own him. And then it happened. An overseer, red-faced, reeking of rum, stumbled toward him. He carried the whip, coiled like a serpent. With a grin, he uncoiled it, let it drag in the dirt. "You think you're strong, boy," he slurred. "You think those eyes of yours scare me? Let's see how much fight's in you tonight." The whip cracked, once, twice. But this time, Thomas caught it. The leather burned his palm, split the skin, but he held on. The overseer yanked, cursed, and swung again. Thomas pulled, and the whip became his. What followed was not planned, not rehearsed. It was instinct. It was rage given flesh. The whip cracked, not against Thomas, but against the overseer's back. Once, twice, again. By the time the others heard the screams, the overseer was dead, his blood soaking the dirt. His own whip tangled around his throat. 3 more would follow before dawn. Each one met the same fate, each one falling to the sound of leather singing through the night. By sunrise, the plantation was in chaos. Overseers dead, the enslaved staring in disbelief, some in horror, some in awe. Thomas stood among them, chest heaving, whip still in hand. His back, scarred from years of lashes, now slick with sweat, with blood not his own. For a moment, silence. Then a whisper, soft, trembling. The butcher. The name spread like fire. The man who turned the whip on its master. The man who carved overseers open like cattle. The man who made Charleston tremble. But rebellion does not go unanswered. By the next night, patrols scoured the woods, muskets loaded, dogs snarling at the end of their leashes, posters nailed to walls, wanted, dead or alive. Thomas had vanished into the swamps. The city held its breath. White spoke his name with fear. The enslaved spoke it with reverence. Some said he would lead them, as Toussaint had led in Haiti. Some said he had already fled north, vanishing into freedom. Others claimed he haunted the rice fields still, striking in the dark. But one thing was certain: Charleston would never forget him. And in the shadows of 1798, the legend of the Butcher of Charleston was born. The city was at war with a ghost. Thomas was out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. And as the hunt for him grew bloodier, as rumors twisted into terror, Charleston found itself asking, was he a man, monster, or martyr? The truth would shake the city to its core. The dogs bayed through the night. Charleston was a city under siege, not from foreign invaders, not from pirates at sea, but from one man with a whip. Slave patrols fanned through the swamps, torches flickering, muskets raised. The sound of hoofbeats echoed across dirt roads. Posters nailed to trees promised silver for capture, gold for his head. But Thomas was no fool. He had lived in those swamps all his life. He knew which roots to step on, which waters to wade, how to mask his scent with mud. The hunters searched. The dogs howled. But the swamp swallowed him whole. By day, Charleston trembled. Planters gathered in drawing rooms, their hands shaking around glasses of brandy. They spoke in low tones, voices quivering. If one man could kill 4 overseers, what if there are others? What if Haiti comes here? Rumors spread faster than truth. Some swore Thomas commanded an army of runaways in the marshes. Others claimed he had slipped into the city, walking its cobblestone streets in disguise. Every whisper fed the fire. Slave patrols doubled again. Night curfews locked down the quarters. A man could be flogged or hanged for carrying so much as a stick. And yet, in the shadows, Hope flickered. In the cabins, by the dim glow of fire, the enslaved spoke his name. The Butcher. The man who had turned the overseer's whips against them. The man who had stood tall when no one else dared. To some, he was a ghost, already free, laughing from the north. To others, he was a spirit, haunting the men who once held the lash. To many, he was proof that overseers could bleed. Those chains could break. For children, his story became a lullaby. For men, it was fuel. For women, vengeance was long denied. And though fear lingered, fear of patrols, fear of punishment, the whisper carried something stronger. Possibility. Meanwhile, Thomas hid. The swamps became his prison, his sanctuary. Days blurred into nights. He lived on berries, roots, and stolen scraps. His clothes rotted, his skin swarmed with bites. But hunger was nothing. Loneliness was worse. He had not meant to become a legend. He had only meant to survive, to fight back, to make them bleed as they had made him bleed. Now, every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. Every snapping twig was a patrol at his back. Sleep came in fragments, broken by the baying of dogs in the distance. And yet, he endured. Because Thomas knew the overseer's deaths had changed everything. There was no going back. It was not dogs that found him, not patrols, but men who looked like him. 2 enslaved men offered coins and a promise of mercy. They followed his tracks through the marsh, waited until his fire burned low, until his eyes sagged heavy with exhaustion. And in the dead of night, they bound him. Thomas fought. He tore one man's arm, broke another's nose. But hunger had weakened him. Shackles clicked around his wrists once more. Dragged from the swamp, beaten, bloodied, he was delivered back to the men he had once defied. Charleston demanded spectacle. The courtroom was packed. White men filled the benches, their wives clutching at handkerchiefs. Slave patrols stood guard, muskets ready. Outside, crowds swelled, white and black, free and enslaved, each desperate to see the man who had turned the city upside down. Thomas was marched in, barefoot, shackled, back straight. His face was gaunt, his beard ragged, but his eyes burned as they always had, unyielding. The charges rang out: murder, insurrection, treason against the state of South Carolina. The prosecutor spat words like venom. This man is a beast, a savage. He butchered 4 overseers with their own whips. He threatens not only this city, but civilization itself. The crowd murmured. Some gasped. Some nodded with grim approval. Others, the enslaved in the back, heads bowed, remained silent. When asked for his defense, Thomas said nothing at first. Then, slowly, he raised his head. They whipped my mother until she could not walk. His voice low, rough. They whipped me until my back was not skin, but scar. They laughed, and I endured. He paused. The silence was heavy, until one night I did not endure. The jury took less than an hour. Guilty. The sentence, death by hanging. Public at dawn. But it would not be enough for Charleston. They needed more. They needed to warn him. And so, word spread. Posters nailed to walls. Invitations whispered across parlors. The Butcher of Charleston would hang before the eyes of the city. A spectacle. A warning. A lesson carved into the flesh of every man, woman, and child in chains. The night before his execution, Thomas sat in the dark of his cell, shackles at his wrists, rats scratching in the straw. Some said he prayed. Some said he wept. Others swore he sang, a low, rumbling hymn carried through the stone walls like thunder. But all agreed on one thing. When dawn came and the rope swung above the square, Charleston would witness not just the death of a man, but the birth of a myth. The dawn of Charleston came heavy, thick, and hot. The kind of dawn that pressed sweat into the collars of shirts before the sun had fully risen. the kind that made the air taste of salt and iron. And into that dawn, Charleston gathered. They came by carriage and cart, by foot and horseback, men in pressed coats and powdered wigs, women in linen dresses, fanning their faces with gloved hands, children sitting on their father's shoulders, craning their necks for a glimpse of the spectacle. Because today was no ordinary morning. Today, the Butcher of Charleston was to hang. The gallows had been built in the center of the square, higher than the crowd, higher even than the surrounding shop roofs. The rope swung gently in the humid breeze, its fibers pale and new, a cruel piece of craftsmanship. Soldiers lined the edges of the square. Slave patrols stood shoulder to shoulder, muskets ready, eyes darting toward the pockets of enslaved people herded in groups along the sides. They had been forced to come, forced to watch. Every rebellion needed a lesson. Every chain needed tightening. And Thomas, the man they called the Butcher, was to be that lesson. But inside the jailhouse, Thomas sat in silence. His wrists were shackled, iron biting deep into scarred flesh. The straw at his feet stank of sweat and waste. The walls sweated with damp. A single torch flickered outside the bars, its light painting his face in shadow. All night he had sat like this, awake, listening. The creak of wood as guards shifted in their chairs, the mutter of voices, the snore of a jailer dozing against the wall, rats scratching in the straw. His heart was steady, too steady. He knew what awaited him, the rope, the jeering crowd. His body swinging for hours in the thick heat while planters raised their children to see. That was their victory. Not just killing him, but parading him, making his death theirs. And Thomas smiled. Because in the deepest part of him, he knew they would not have him. Not like that. The door groaned open. Keys rattled. Heavy boots scraped stone. The jailer stepped into view, yawning, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. A man worn down by routine, not cruelty. He carried bread in one hand, water in the other. "Up, Butcher," he muttered, voice rough from sleep. "Last meal." Thomas raised his head slowly. His eyes glinted in the torchlight. Dark, steady, almost calm. The jailer frowned. Something in those eyes made his stomach twist. He set down the bread, slid the cup through the bars. Thomas did not reach for it. Instead, he stood, slowly, deliberately. The jailer's gaze shifted, then froze. In Thomas's hand, clenched tight, was a jagged shard of rusted iron, a splinter torn from the cot frame, blood already smeared along his palm where it had cut him. "God Almighty," the jailer whispered, stumbling back. "What?" But he never finished. Thomas did not hesitate. The shard drove inward, straight into his chest. Once, twice. The sound was sickening. Flesh tearing, bone cracking, blood spilling hot and fast down his torso. His body shuddered, but his hand never wavered. He looked the jailer in the eye, and with a final thrust, he drove the iron deep into his own heart. He collapsed onto the straw, blood soaking through, pooling black in the dim light. His breath rattled once, twice, then stopped. The jailer screamed for help, keys falling, clattering against stone. Guards rushed in, muskets raised, shouts echoing down the corridor. But it was too late. Thomas was gone. Not by rope, not by their hand, but on his own. Word spread like wildfire. The preacher dropped his Bible in shock. The mayor cursed, slamming his fist against the wall. Guards swarmed, shouting, arguing, dragging the lifeless body into the open. "What do we do?" one hissed. "The crowd is waiting," another barked. We can't just tell them he's dead." "They came for justice," the mayor snapped. "We'll give it to them, one way or another." The body was hoisted, limp and bloody, shackles still clamped at the wrists. If Charleston could not have his life, they would take his corpse. The square erupted as soldiers dragged the body up the gallows steps. Some gasped. Women shrieked, clutching their children close. Men swore under their breath. "He's dead," someone shouted. "Cheated the rope," another cried. And yet, the mayor's voice rang out over the noise, trembling with fury. "Justice shall not be denied." At his order, the rope was forced around Thomas's neck. His body, already still, was lifted high, the rope pulled taut until it swayed. The Butcher of Charleston hung in the morning sun. But the crowd was unsettled. It was not what they had come for. There was no pleading, no cries, no writhing, only silence, only defiance. A dead man cannot be humiliated. A dead man cannot be humiliated. A dead man cannot perform their theater of power. And as they stared, some swore his cloudy eyes still burned. The square fractured. Some jeered anyway, spitting at his body, hurling stones and curses. "Savage," they shouted. "Beast." Others, quieter, stood rooted, watching, uneasy. The enslaved, crowded at the edges, dared not cheer, dared not weep, but their eyes shone. They saw not defeat, but victory, because Thomas had taken the last decision from their hands. They had wanted to make him a warning. Instead, he had made himself a weapon. By noon, the square was nearly empty. The sun blistered overhead, the smell of sweat and blood thick in the air. Thomas's body still hung, swinging gently, a grotesque scarecrow. But by nightfall, whispers had already spread. Whispers that he had laughed as he died. Whispers that he had cursed Charleston with his last breath. Whispers that he had broken the rope from the inside out, choosing freedom and death. In the cabins, the enslaved told his story with pride. The man who had taken the whip. The man who had killed 4 overseers. The man who had denied Charleston its spectacle. Children listened wide-eyed. Women sang it softly. Men carried it like fire in their hearts. The butcher had not been broken. Not in life. Not in death. Charleston tried to bury him, tried to call him a monster, tried to make him nothing but a name, nothing but a warning. But stories are stronger than chains. And in the end, Thomas became more than flesh, more than blood, more than bone. He became a whisper in the fields, a shadow in the swamps, a fire that no gallows could quench. The Butcher of Charleston, man-monster, martyr, and above all, free. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below.